You'll leave with nothing, because you are nothing." The words came out sharp, calculated, and cruel. They weren't shouted in anger. They were delivered like a verdict. At 9:14 a.m., inside the sterile, echoing chamber of a downtown divorce court, Daniel Cole leaned across the polished oak table and spat those words at the woman who had once been his partner in everything, his wife, Maya. The room went still. A couple of clerks at the back shifted uneasily, their pens halting mid-note. The judge had not yet entered, but already the air felt charged, like a storm pressing against glass. Daniel's voice carried the arrogance of a man who believed the fight was already won. He looked at her not as a human being, not as the woman who had built a life beside him for 12 years, but as an opponent he had already stripped bare. Maya didn't flinch. She sat composed, her hands folded neatly over the slim leather folio in front of her. No diamond rings, no designer clothes, no visible armor of wealth, just a simple charcoal dress and a calm that unsettled those who looked too closely. She had walked into this courthouse knowing today was not just about divorce papers. It was about dignity and about what people assume when they think you have nothing left. Daniel smirked, leaning back in his chair. "The house is mine, the cars are mine, even your family shares signed over, sealed. You built nothing without me, Maya, and after today, you'll be back where you came from, alone, invisible." The sting of his words wasn't just in their cruelty, it was in their performance. He spoke loud enough for everyone present to hear: his attorney, the bailiff near the door, even the young law student shadowing in the corner. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the humiliation to echo. But humiliation requires consent. And Maya Cole, 42 years old, CEO of a hospitality empire Daniel couldn't even spell correctly on paper, had no intention of giving him that satisfaction. She lowered her gaze briefly, as if absorbing the blow, then lifted it again with eyes steady as glass. There was no fury, no outburst, only stillness. The kind of stillness that unsettles bullies because it does not break. Her silence made Daniel louder. "You hear me?" he snapped, voice rising with false triumph. "Everything you thought you had, it's gone. I took it. You're finished." The clerk at the back frowned. The bailiff shifted his weight, uncomfortable. The young law student bit her lip, sensing something she couldn't yet name. Maya remained unmoved. She knew Daniel believed her quiet meant defeat. But quiet has layers. Quiet can mean strategy. Quiet can mean a storm waiting for its moment. And in Maya's silence, a truth was already forming, one Daniel could not imagine. He thought he had taken it all. What he didn't know was that Maya had secured something far beyond his reach. A $30 million secret, held quietly, patiently, like a loaded verdict waiting for the right time. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Maya. The court clerk called her name Maya Cole, and a hush moved through the room. She rose slowly, each step measured, not hurried, not defensive. Her charcoal dress fell simply to her knees, her shoes modest black flats that made no sound on the marble floor. To an untrained eye, she looked like any other woman worn down by a divorce, proceeding quiet, reserved, outmatched by a man who strutted like he had already won. That was the image Daniel wanted the world to see. Him, triumphant. Her, diminished. But images can be deceiving. What no one in that courtroom knew, what Daniel had refused to believe, was that Maya was the chief architect of a hospitality empire spanning 4 countries, with revenues stretching into the hundreds of millions. She was not just successful, she was formidable. But today, she chose to look small. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Her mind flickered back for a moment to a hotel lobby in Charlotte, decades earlier. She was 16, wearing her Sunday best, waiting for her parents. A clerk walked up and told her she didn't belong in the lounge. She remembered the sting of standing on the sidewalk, embarrassed, treated like she was dirt. That moment planted something inside her, a seed that grew into resolve, into vision, into an empire Daniel now pretended was his. But Daniel never built the seed. He only watered what she had already planted. And now, in this room, he wanted to uproot her completely. Maya sat again, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Around her, the atmosphere shifted uneasily. The law student scribbled something, eyes flicking between the two of them. The bailiff near the door adjusted his stance. as though sensing that this was no ordinary case. Daniel, meanwhile, leaned back with the confidence of a man who thought appearances decided truth. "Look at her," he said, his words pitched loud enough for the room. "Dressed like she shops at clearance racks. This is who built an empire? Please, she can't even dress the part." A faint laugh escaped his attorney, a sharp exhale meant to wound. The clerk at the back looked down, unwilling to meet Maya's eyes. The humiliation was public, staged, deliberate. But humiliation requires a reaction. Maya gave none. Her calm wasn't silence, it was command. She knew the less she said now, the more powerful her words would be when the moment came. Daniel misread her quiet as defeat, the same mistake men had made her entire life. He had forgotten that she had learned long ago. Stillness is not surrender. Stillness is preparation. And while Daniel gloated, convinced he had stripped her of everything, Maya sat with a secret he could not touch: a portfolio of holdings, quiet accounts, and one number that would turn his arrogance into ash. 30 million. The scrape of a chair echoed as Daniel's attorney rose, a tall man with polished shoes, and a voice that carried like he was already addressing a jury. "Your Honor," he began, even before the judge had entered, "let the record show that Mrs. Cole has failed to provide any verifiable financial disclosures. My client, Mr. Cole, has presented every document, every statement. She has nothing to stand on." The words were rehearsed, sharp as blades. They weren't meant for a record yet, they were meant for her. Daniel smirked and leaned toward Maya, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "This is where you crumble. No assets, no claim, just a name you borrowed from me." A murmur ran through the clerks at the back. The young law student shifted uncomfortably, pen pausing midair. Even the bailiff's eyes narrowed, uneasy with the cruelty woven into Daniel's tone. Maya didn't move. Her hands remained folded, her face unreadable. She had heard this script before in boardrooms, in negotiations, in whispers from investors who underestimated her. It was the same pattern. Doubt the woman, dismiss the black woman, erase her contribution. Daniel had perfected that dismissal, and now staged it in front of an audience. He raised his voice, letting it fill the chamber. "She lived off me. Every car, every dinner, every vacation, I paid for it all. She couldn't even balance a checkbook without me." His attorney nodded solemnly, as though delivering gospel truth. "Our filings prove Mr. Cole provided all financial resources for this marriage. Mrs. Cole, in contrast, has failed to demonstrate a single independent asset." The humiliation was no longer private, it was spectacle. Daniel wanted it that way. He leaned back, eyes gleaming, scanning the room to make sure the message landed. To him, this was more than divorce, it was erasure. Maya inhaled slowly, her expression unchanged. Inside, she thought of the nights she worked past midnight, building contracts Daniel never read, the hotel designs he dismissed until they turned profit, the strategy meetings where he nodded off and she carried the weight. He had forgotten all of it, or perhaps he had chosen to forget, because the truth threatened the version of himself he clung to. "Everything she touched was mine first," Daniel continued, voice loud now, performative. "She wouldn't even have a credit card if it weren't for me." His attorney placed another stack of papers on the table, the slap of paper against wood like a gavel. "We ask this court to recognize that Mrs. Cole has no standing, no property, no entitlement." The law student finally raised her eyes, gaze flicking to Maya. Something about the quiet way she sat still, calm, anchored, didn't match the narrative being forced onto her. She scribbled a note, her pen trembling slightly. Daniel mistook the silence again. He smirked, leaned closer, and whispered harsh enough for the row behind them to hear, "By the end of this, you'll be a ghost. No money, no name, no place to go." The words struck like shrapnel, intended to bury her dignity. But Maya didn't blink, because ghosts don't hold secrets, and her secret was alive, breathing, and waiting for its moment. The stack of papers lay heavy on the table, their edges sharp, their weight symbolic. Daniel's attorney tapped them like a trophy, a prop in a play meant to convince everyone that Maya was finished. But Maya didn't reach for them. She didn't protest, didn't scramble, didn't even look down. Instead, she placed her palms flat against the table and sat as if rooted to the floor, unshakable. The silence was unnerving. Daniel shifted in his chair, almost irritated that his words had not broken her. "Say something," he demanded, his voice dripping with false triumph. "Admit it, you've lost." Still, she gave him nothing. Her gaze remained forward, her breathing steady. It was the kind of composure that doesn't come from ignorance but from knowledge Daniel did not have. The law student in the back leaned forward slightly, studying her. She had seen defendants beg, cry, lash out. She had never seen this. The calm was dissonant, like a drumbeat muffled underwater, steady but ominous. Daniel grew louder, filling the void with his own voice. "See, Your Honor? Silence is consent. She has no defense, no assets, nothing to claim. But silence is not consent. Silence is strategy." Maya remembered another silence years earlier when she walked into a New York bank at 27, eager to secure funding for her first major property. The loan officer had looked at her modest clothes and asked if she was running errands for her boss. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't argued. She had simply waited, then handed over documents that proved she owned more collateral than most of his clients combined. That silence had turned humiliation into victory, and now, once again, she leaned on it. Her attorney glanced at her, almost restless, as if waiting for a signal. Maya gave none. Not yet. Timing mattered. Daniel smirked wider, mistaking her restraint for surrender. He leaned back in his chair, projecting for the entire room. "She doesn't even deny it. That should tell you everything. She came here to play victim, but the truth is simple, she has nothing." The clerk at the back frowned, her pen pausing. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Maya with something that looked like reluctant respect. They weren't convinced by Daniel's noise. They were unsettled by Maya's quiet. Because silence has a gravity of its own. The young law student wrote quickly in the margin of her notebook, "She isn't broken. She's waiting." Daniel didn't see it. He leaned forward once more, close enough for only she and a few others to hear. "I told you you're nothing, and when this is over, everyone will see it." Maya's eyes finally shifted, turning to meet his. Calm, steady, unyielding. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In that stillness, she carried more authority than all his shouting combined. And though Daniel thought he was winning, the room was already beginning to wonder, what kind of woman sits in silence like that unless she knows something no one else does? The door at the back creaked open, and two more observers slipped quietly into the gallery citizens with the right to sit in on public hearings. They found seats along the far wall, just as Daniel's voice carried through the chamber. "Look at her," he scoffed, sweeping his hand toward Maya like she was an exhibit. "Not a word, not a document. Nothing to prove she belongs at this table." One of the newcomers, a young black man in his 20s, frowned and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the camera app. He glanced at Maya, then at Daniel, then back at his screen. The instinct to record was strong. This smelled of injustice, the kind that deserved daylight. Across the aisle, the law student noticed the motion. She whispered, "Don't," her voice soft but urgent. "Not yet. The judge hasn't entered. If you film now, they'll shut it down." The man hesitated, then lowered his phone slightly. Still, the impulse didn't fade. He leaned toward her. "Then at least tell me you see it," he muttered. Her pen pressed harder against the page. "I see it." The bailiff near the door cleared his throat, eyes tracking the quiet exchange. His posture had shifted less rigid formality, more wary watchfulness. He had worked enough hearings to know when power was being abused. And though his uniform demanded neutrality, his conscience pricked at him. Daniel, oblivious, pressed on. He wanted witnesses, but only to his script. "This court doesn't need theatrics. The facts are here." He tapped the pile of papers again. Meanwhile, she sits in silence. You can read the truth in her silence. There is no truth. The clerk at the back shook her head slightly, almost involuntarily. She had logged hundreds of cases. Silence usually meant fear, but this silence had a weight to it. It wasn't collapse, it was composure. She made a small note in the margin of her ledger, unmoved. The law student glanced again at Maya. Her calm unsettled her more than Daniel's noise. She leaned back, chewing her pen cap, whispering under her breath, "She's not folding. She's waiting." Meanwhile, the young man in the gallery tightened his grip on his phone. He knew moments like this disappeared too easily. Voices silenced, stories buried. He raised it again, thumb brushing the record button. That was when Maya finally spoke, not to Daniel, not to the attorney, but to him. "Don't," she said softly, her tone firm enough to cut through the air. "We settle this with words. not clips. The gallery stilled. Even Daniel paused, blinking at the interruption. The young man lowered his phone slowly, searching her face. What he saw wasn't fear, it was control. She wasn't avoiding exposure, she was commanding the battlefield. Daniel sneered. Still playing calm? Fine. Don't record. Won't matter when she's out on the street. But for the first time, the spectators weren't laughing with him. They were watching her, and in that quiet exchange, her gaze steady. His phone lowering the room began to tilt. The story was no longer just Daniel's performance. It was Maya's silence gathering witnesses. The heavy wooden door at the front swung open, and the judge finally entered. Everyone rose as protocol demanded, but Daniel's smirk never wavered. To him, the judge's arrival meant game over. All his noise, all his papers, all his accusations, he believed they were about to be stamped with legal authority. The judge took her seat, adjusting her glasses, scanning the room. Daniel's attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor," he began, voice booming with confidence, "we request immediate dismissal of Mrs. Cole's claims. She has produced no financial evidence. We ask that she be removed from proceedings regarding marital assets, as she has none to claim." The word removed rippled through the room like a sudden chill. The bailiff stiffened. The law student's pen froze mid-stroke. Even the young man in the gallery frowned. His phone clenched tight again. Daniel seized the moment. "Yes," he added loudly, turning toward Maya with cruel precision. "Removed. She doesn't belong at this table. She doesn't belong in this courtroom. She doesn't belong in anything I built." He leaned forward, voice rising with every word. "Throw her out, and let her watch from the hall like the outsider she's always been." The insult hung heavy. It wasn't just about divorce, it was about erasure. About declaring, in front of strangers and law, that she had never mattered. The judge lifted an eyebrow, studying Maya. "Mrs. Cole, do you have a response?" All eyes turned. The air buzzed with expectation. Would she finally crack, finally plead, finally reveal desperation? But Maya simply folded her hands and spoke evenly. "No response at this time, Your Honor." The calm was almost jarring. No anger, no panic, just control. Daniel's attorney scoffed. "There you have it. Silence. Your Honor, I move for dismissal effective immediately. She has nothing to contribute but wasted time." The law student's hand shook as she scribbled in her notes. They're trying to erase her voice. Daniel pressed harder, raising his voice now for the gallery, for the clerks, for anyone who might doubt. "She's a fraud. She lived off me every cent, every scrap, and now she sits here pretending to be equal." The young man in the gallery muttered under his breath, "This is foul." His hand twitched toward his phone again, but Maya's steady gaze caught his. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Daniel mistook the gesture as weakness, and it fueled him further. "You see? Even she won't deny it. Because she can't. Because there's nothing there. She should be escorted out before she embarrasses herself further." The clerk looked up sharply, her jaw tight. The bailiff's brow furrowed. The atmosphere had shifted. The cruelty was becoming visible to everyone, not just Maya. But Maya herself remained anchored. She breathed evenly, her gaze unbroken, her silence deliberate. Because while Daniel shouted for her removal, he didn't realize he was building the very record that would bury him. The judge's gavel struck once for order, but Daniel was already moving. He snatched the stack of papers his attorney had arranged so carefully, yanked the top sheet free, and tore it clean down the middle. The rip echoed sharp and jagged across the chamber. "This," he shouted, holding the torn halves high, "is all she is paper. Empty, worthless, nothing." The gallery gasped. The law student flinched, her pen slipping from her fingers. Even the bailiff's jaw tightened, though he stood rooted, bound by duty. Daniel wasn't finished. He swept his arm across the table, scattering more documents, sending folders tumbling onto the polished floor. Pages fluttered like broken feathers, skidding across the marble. Each sheet that landed felt like another insult thrown. He pointed at Maya, his finger trembling with rage. "Escort her out. Now. She has no place here. This court is for people who matter. She doesn't." His attorney shifted uneasily but said nothing, caught in the undertow of his client's fury. The judge leaned forward sharply. "Mr. Cole, control yourself." But Daniel cut across her voice, reckless now. "No, I won't sit here while this fraud wastes the court's time. She's trespassing on a life I built. Get her out." The bailiff moved slightly, instinct pulling him forward, but hesitation stopped him. His eyes flicked to Maya. She hadn't moved. Not when the papers scattered. Not when the words sharpened into knives. Not even now with the weight of removal pressing toward her. She sat as if anchored, unyielding, her palms still resting flat on the table. The law student found her voice at last, barely more than a whisper. This isn't justice. Daniel heard it. He spun toward the gallery, shouting louder. Stay quiet back there. You don't know what this woman Island. She's nothing but a leech who clung to me for years, and now she wants to take what isn't hers. His words hit like shrapnel, ricocheting around the room. One of the observers clenched his fists, whispering to the person beside him. He's trying to bury her alive. The judge struck the gavel again, harder this time. Order, she barked. But Daniel, intoxicated by his own voice, pressed on. He grabbed one of Maya's neatly stacked folders, ripped it from her side of the table, and hurled it across the room. It landed near the clerk's desk with a hollow thud. See? Empty. Just like her. The bailiff's boots clicked against the marble as he stepped closer. Sir, you need to stand down, he warned. But Daniel pointed again, eyes wild. No, remove her. Drag her out if you have to. The gallery shifted uneasily, whispers growing into murmurs. Phones were clutched tighter. The law student's eyes glistened with outrage she couldn't yet voice. And still, Maya did not flinch. Her silence wasn't absence, it was presence. Each insult Daniel hurled only amplified the gravity of her stillness. She knew. Everyone else would soon know. The bailiff's boots halted just a step away from Maya. His orders were clear: maintain order, protect the court. Yet he hesitated. Something about the imbalance gnawed at him. One voice raging, the other silent but unshaken. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. Why are we still pretending? Get her out! His voice cracked with fury, echoing too loud for a chamber that was supposed to hold dignity. The judge raised her hand, about to speak, when Maya finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her folio. Not for papers, those lay scattered, torn and trampled. Instead, she drew out her phone. The room stilled. Even Daniel faltered, sneer twitching uncertainly. Maya pressed a single button and lifted the device to her ear. Her voice, when it came, was low but clear, carrying effortlessly across the chamber. Nia, it's time. Begin the sequence. Timestamp everything, and log Mr. Cole's words in the record. A faint voice crackled back, calm and professional. Understood, Maya. Protocol Alpha is active. All systems synced. Shall I escalate to corporate? Yes, Maya replied evenly. Escalate and hold. I'll authorize final action when I'm ready. The gallery buzzed. The young man in the back whispered to his neighbor. Who has a corporate protocol in the middle of a divorce hearing? Daniel barked a laugh, desperate to reclaim ground. What is this performance? You think a phone call makes you important? He turned toward the judge, gesturing wildly. See? Stalling. She has nothing. But his laugh sounded brittle, edged with unease. Maya lowered the phone, her hand steady as stone, and placed it gently back in her folio. Everything is being documented now, she said, her voice calm as glass. Every word, every action, nothing disappears today. The law student's eyes widened. She scribbled furiously. Time-stamped, logged, documented. The judge leaned back slightly, studying Maya with new caution. Daniel scoffed louder, but the cracks in his confidence were visible. His voice pushed harder, trying to drown out the shift. Documented? By who? You? You can't even afford a lawyer worth listening to. Stop pretending. But no one was laughing with him now. The clerk at the back had stopped writing entirely, her pen frozen. The bailiff, once ready to escort Maya out, now stood motionless, watching her with a flicker of respect. Because the dynamic had changed. Maya hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't defended herself with desperation. She had made a single call, and in that call, she had revealed the first shadow of power, quiet, procedural, undeniable. Daniel didn't see it yet. He thought it was theater. But the room was beginning to sense what he could not. Silence isn't empty. Silence is preparation. And preparation always leads to revelation. The silence after her phone call lingered, dense as smoke. Daniel shifted in his chair, trying to laugh it off. Pathetic. Calling your little friends while real decisions are being made here. His smirk twitched, but it no longer landed. Maya lifted her chin, finally turning her full gaze on him. Her voice was measured, deliberate. You believe silence means weakness, Daniel. But silence is where I build. The judge leaned forward slightly, brows knitting. The gallery stilled, sensing something was about to crack open. Maya drew a slim envelope from her folio untouched until now. She placed it on the table, sliding it slowly toward the center. The paper whispered against the wood, louder in its restraint than any of Daniel's outbursts. Danielle scoffed. "What is this? Another empty folder? More stalling?" Maya folded her hands neatly. "Inside are my independent holdings, verified accounts, active trusts, corporate records, assets you never touched because you were never entitled to them." Daniel barked a hollow laugh. "Lies!" But Maya's calm never wavered. $30 million, Daniel. Unencumbered. Protected. Mine. The words detonated without volume, their weight crashing into the chamber. The clerk at the back gasped softly. The law student's pen fell from her hand. Even the bailiff's eyes flicked wide for a fraction of a second. Daniel blinked, his smirk faltering. "What?" "You heard me," Maya said evenly. "While you were busy performing wealth, I was building it. Quietly, efficiently, beyond your reach. 30 million, documented and sealed long before you tried to erase me." She slid the envelope closer to the judge. "This court can confirm every page. Protocol Alpha has already logged and transmitted duplicates to secure servers. Nothing you tear up today will vanish. Nothing you shout will erase." The judge accepted the envelope, adjusting her glasses as she opened it. The rustle of papers was the only sound. The room leaned forward collectively, every breath caught between disbelief and revelation. Daniel's face reddened, his words stumbling. This is fabricated. She's bluffing. You can't prove." But his voice cracked. For the first time that morning, doubt edged his tone. Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady, her voice precise. "You called me nothing, Daniel. You called me empty. You called me erased. But you never asked why I stayed quiet. The answer is simple. I didn't need to argue. I only needed to wait. And now the record speaks louder than you ever could." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The young man who had nearly filmed earlier whispered, "She's been holding the cards all along." The judge set the papers down slowly, her expression unreadable. But the gravity in the room had shifted completely. Daniel stared at Maya, stunned, the arrogance drained from his posture. For the first time, he looked small. The envelope lay open on the judge's bench, its pages fanned like evidence waiting to breathe. The weight of $30 million sat silently between them, undeniable, immovable. Daniel's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words formed. For a man who had shouted so loudly moments before, the absence of sound was louder still. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but the words carried just enough for the gallery to catch. "These are authenticated. We didn't prepare for this." His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his own stack of useless papers, suddenly props in the wrong play. The law student pressed a palm to her mouth, whispering to no one in particular. She had it, the whole time. "Oh." At the back, the clerk exchanged a glance with the bailiff. The unspoken truth passed between them. Everything Daniel had declared, every insult, every dismissal was collapsing in real time. Daniel slammed his palm on the table again, but it no longer rang with confidence. It rang hollow. Forgery. That's what this island, she fabricated these accounts. His words stumbled, fragile as glass. The young man in the gallery shook his head. If it was fake, she wouldn't have logged it live. That call wasn't for show. It was insurance. He whispered to the woman beside him. "We just watched him hang himself." The murmurs spread like fire. A woman near the aisle whispered, "He said she had nothing." Another voice added, "She's the one with the empire." Phones were lifted, not to record in defiance, but to type, to message, to share. The courtroom itself was becoming a story. Daniel's attorney tugged at his sleeve. "Stop talking," he hissed. "Every word is being logged. You're feeding her case." But Daniel's pride was a runaway train. "No, this is a trick. She doesn't have 30 million. She never built anything. He cut himself off, finally noticing the circle of faces staring back at him not with support, but with judgment. The bailiff, once steps away from escorting Maya out, now stood with arms crossed. His stance shifted, not against her, against him. The judge adjusted her glasses again, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Cole, the documents will be reviewed by the court. Until then, refrain from further outbursts. Your accusations are unsubstantiated." The words landed like a sentence. Daniel slumped slightly, the bravado leaking from his frame. Maya remained still, hands folded neatly. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she didn't need to. The gallery, however, did not stay silent. A ripple of awe, outrage, and vindication pulsed through the room. Strangers who had almost pitied her minutes earlier now watched with something else respect. For them, the drama was no longer about money. It was about revelation. The erasure they had witnessed was exposed as fraud, and the woman Daniel called nothing had just become everything. The judge's words still lingered in the chamber when Maya reached once more for her phone. Calm, steady, deliberate, every move in sharp contrast to the chaos Daniel had created. She pressed the screen. "Nia," she said softly, yet her voice carried. "Authorize the freeze. All joint accounts, all company cards tied to Daniel Cole's name, effective immediately." On the other end, Nia's tone was crisp, unquestioning. "Confirmed. Initiating now. Bank and corporate systems synced. He no longer has access." A hush fell. The gallery leaned in as though they had just witnessed something irreversible. Daniel shot upright, panic flashing across his face. "What? No, you can't do that. Those are my accounts." Maya finally turned to face him directly. Her eyes were calm, almost pitying. "They were ours, until you tried to erase me. Now they are mine, legally, irrevocably." The clerk scribbled furiously, her pen shaking. The law student whispered, almost reverent, "She just cut him off at the root." Daniel's attorney paled, tugging at his client's sleeve again. "She has the authority. Stop speaking. Every word is a nail in the coffin." But Daniel was unraveling. "No, this is theft. She's stealing from me." Maya's voice cut through his desperation like steel. "You can't steal what you built yourself. And Daniel, you built nothing." The judge struck the gavel once, silencing the outburst. But the damage was already done. Daniel's face reddened, his chest heaving, but his words no longer commanded the room. Maya lifted the phone once more. "Nia, confirm closure of all secondary accounts. Alert legal to prepare audit documentation. And notify security teams at corporate offices Mr. Cole no longer holds clearance." "Understood," Nia replied. "Actioning now. Log secured." The bailiff, who only minutes earlier had been asked to remove Maya, now stood watching Daniel with narrowed eyes. The power dynamic had shifted so sharply it was almost dizzying. In the gallery, the young man whispered with awe, "She just fired him from his own life." Daniel's knees buckled slightly as he sank back into his chair. For the first time, he looked smaller than the woman he had tried to erase. Maya did not gloat. Her expression was steady, unyielding, a portrait of dignity. She knew punishment wasn't about theatrics, it was about precision. And today, precision was hers. The chamber was silent now, but it wasn't Daniel's silence, it was Maya's. A silence that carried weight, that commanded respect. The torn papers on the floor looked pitiful beside the neatly stacked evidence on the judge's bench. Daniel slumped in his chair, hands trembling, his face pale with disbelief. A man who had thundered minutes before now looked like he was drowning in his own echoes. His attorney no longer whispered strategy. He simply stared down at the table, knowing the verdict of power had already been delivered outside the judge's gavel. Maya rose slowly, gathering her folio. The simple motion drew every eye in the room. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. She had already won. She turned to Daniel one final time, her voice low, steady, and cutting through the chamber like a blade. "You called me nothing. You tried to erase me in front of strangers. But let me be clear, silence is not weakness. It is preparation. And today, Daniel, your own arrogance prepared the stage for me." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The law student's pen scratched furiously, desperate to capture the words. The young man in the back whispered, "That's it. That's the moment." Maya stepped toward the bench, addressing the judge directly, but allowing her voice to carry to every corner of the room. "I don't need recordings. I don't need theatrics. I am the result, and the record will show it, long after his shouting is forgotten." The judge gave a slow nod, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp with recognition. Maya gathered the last page from her envelope, slid it neatly back into place, and closed the folio with a soft click that echoed louder than Daniel's fury had. Turning toward the gallery, she allowed one final statement to land not just for him, not just for the court, but for everyone watching. You thought I was nothing because I chose to be quiet, but quiet women build empires, and today, mine stands while yours crumbles. The words settled like stone, undeniable, irreversible. The bailiff stepped back, as though in respect. The clerk lowered her pen, her eyes wide. The law student exhaled, whispering, "Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits." Maya walked toward the exit with calm steps, her flats barely touching the marble, her folio tucked under her arm. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The court wasn't hers to win or lose anymore. It was simply another room she had passed through, leaving the truth behind. And as the doors closed softly behind her, the message was clear. Dignity doesn't beg, it doesn't scream, it doesn't collapse. It endures, it builds, it triumphs.